Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Glick. And if this is your first time joining us, each week when you tune in, you will hear a couple different types of episodes. Sometimes when you tune in, you're going to hear industry news. That's where we pull up a few different headlines. We talk about what those headlines mean, we dig into the articles, and we talk about what it means for the industry. And then other times when you tune in, you're going to hear an interview style show. That's where we have on somebody associated with the land development industry. We hear more about their origin story, and then we dig into some of the projects that they have going on. And today we have an interview style show for you. And joining me is Sean Myers, the managing director of Brightleaf Properties and co founder of Great Leaf Homes. Sean, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Ryan. I look forward to it.
Yeah. So, where we always start on these episodes is digging into really your origin story. So, how you got into real estate, got into development and kind of the industry in general. Whether it's something that you always knew you wanted to get into, or it's something that a certain thing happened at some point in your career that led you that direction. Can you walk us through kind of your origin story of how you got into real estate?
Sure. I would say like real estate was not something I thought about, being involved in high school or college. I was a English literature major and got a job at an advertising agency after finishing at Florida State. And, at the agency, I'm writing ads, I'm learning about other people's businesses. And I really didn't like being in the office and working on someone else's business. And where we were was a transitional neighborhood in downtown. And I just met a guy outside who's, renovating houses, little old 50s bungalows and making them look nice. And I'm like, that sounds interesting. So I just got in as a residential agent, started working on housing, selling houses and flipping houses. And then after about a year or two of that, I realized, there's kind of a limit and I wanted to look at something bigger. So I was looking at different types and I just liked land. I had a couple of connections of people who knew some guys who had done land stuff. And so of all the different kind of commercial types that appealed to me, I grew up and the on farms in Texas. And so going outside of Orlando into Central Florida was kind of like going back home to me to see the farms, except that we're developing them instead of growing stuff on them. So I started as a land broker, identifying land that could be sold for future development for investors, and then eventually a small group of investors, they're like, "Hey, you should start doing the permitting and title for this." I'm like, "You guys know I don't know anything about that." And they're like, "You'll figure it out. Just go, call these land planners, call these engineers, go down." To their office, and instead of us selling this one to somebody else or hold it, we're going to have you entitle it. So that was literally how it started. They're like, just go do it. So I show up at the office of Boyer Singleton. They're not around anymore. They've like acquired, but literally sat down like, I've been tasked with doing this land development. It's going to be residential, and that's all I know. I know less about real estate development than anyone else who's going to claim to be a real estate developer. So just help me out, and I'll ask questions and try not to make mistakes. And the guys were like, okay, great. And I have to admit, that's a lot of how real estate development is done, because even once you've been doing it, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you're still relying on experts. And it's your team of, all your consultants, all those guys who you're never going to learn all the details of what they're doing. And, I'll learn it and then forget it again. So it's really the key is being comfortable with that kind of, relying on other people and coordinating the team and directing the team, which I actually, like I said, I had no idea what real estate development was, but then after I got into it, I really like doing it. I like the idea of thinking what could be, what's needed, and putting little numbers together, and then also have a little bit of the vision, and you're taking risk out there, and there's unknowns. So we were at a city commission meeting last night, and it was an unusual case where the commercial developer um, was purchasing land from the city, and he needs a price reduction because he had X, Y, and Z issues, which happens all the time. And some of the city commissioners were like, "Well, you should have known that before." And I was biting my tongue. I didn't want to get up there and speak as the public. Like, no, we have, you know, we figure out all the problems while we're working on it, and so there's no way he knows all the stuff that's going to happen. But from that start, I did learn enough to get us going, and then we started doing land entitlement and basically selling finished lots to home builders like Lennar, KB Homes, Syntex. groups like that. And so just kind of learned by doing it. It's great today. They have podcasts and books and all kinds of, ways to learn about it. Back then I was just kind of like asking questions
Right.
and paying attention, and you meet a couple other developers. Developers, land developers, the ones I've met, they're usually kind of people persons. So they'll, excited to talk about what they're doing and, which consultant to use and which city. And um, we ended up doing close to 7,000 lots in our pipeline over that time period before the great financial crisis, in which case, after that, didn't have to do any more land development and learn the, distressed apartment income side of the business, which was good because now we're kind of coming back around to we have the whole build to rent, um, industry coming up. So when I saw that, I'm like, great, this is going to, work through my subdivisions much faster. Our lease velocity is going to be higher than sales velocity on there. And if you're ever doing a land development pro forma, it's like, are we going to sell 4 houses a month or 6 a month or 8 a month? That makes a huge difference in is your deal going to be a 30 month, takedown schedule with the builder, or 48 months, because you have this huge upfront investment. So, it's, when I think back about it, it's a lot of risk you're always taking on. I think if you probably start from the beginning, you'd say, I don't want to do all that. But then once you're in it, you're like, now I'm going to just keep going ahead. So, um, I would say one of the things that's difficult to get a handle on in the beginning is you get excited about projects. And I used to want to do a project in Tampa and Jacksonville, and let's go down to Bradenton and do one in Georgia, and let's do one. We did one in Las Vegas, and after a while, you realize all those jurisdictions are different. There's different consultants. There's different elected officials, the different staff members, and so I really started to specialize in Central Florida. Somewhere with an hour and a half drive. And then even beyond that to certain quadrants, because you just get so much more efficient at, I'm using the same consultants, because you'll have consultants that specialize in areas. I'm seeing the same development planning and zoning director who we have a relationship with, we have a working relationship. And I've noticed I have colleagues that kind of started the same time as me, same age, and they've kind of picked different quadrants too. It's not to say we won't look somewhere else, but I've got a best friend, and he and I are like the same age. He's been doing this like 25 years, and he just picked this other quadrant down there. We're fortunate to be in Central Florida where there's a lot of demand and growth, but that'd be my advice, is to not try to do everything, and kind of picking your area and really picking the project selection. You go in and you get as much information on the kind of pre-application process before you get too committed to, does it seem like it's going to be feasible with the city and things like that. So picking your battles and not doing the hard ones, which I've made the mistake of
Yeah.
doing that before. But yeah, you want to pick, to the extent you can, reduce your risk by feeling pretty confident that your project's going to be successfully received. If you have to go through a rezoning, annexation, land use change, something like that. So that's
Yep.
probably one of the tricks to the business, is picking out those good horses to bet on.
Yeah. So how do you, when you talk about your companies, how do you describe those to other people of what you do, what each of your companies actually does?
Yeah. So with Brightleaf, that's typically doing the land development, and entitlement and permitting, and that is hard to understand because, like, it's not something that's visible. You can't see anything happening. No one pays attention to the city commission or county commission, agenda items. You might notice a rezoning sign, posted on the property, but there's not a lot to see because it's all, applications, and they mail out the neighbors. So that's a little harder to explain. And a lot of people don't even understand the process. They just think, if I want to build a house, I'll build a house. If I want to build a Walmart, I'll build a Walmart. They don't understand, the 2 or 3 years lead time of planning and studies and analysis and things like, permitting that has to go on like that. So that's a little harder to explain. Um, I think my kids didn't understand what I did for maybe until they were like 10 or 12 years old. you
Yeah.
know, I was never asked to come into a class and like, tell us what your dad does.
Yeah.
You then the home building with Great Leaf is much easier because everyone's familiar with single family homes and townhomes. So that's home building company. We started basically, as I was learning about the build to rent industry from, one of my, really competent land broker here that I've had a long relationship with trust, and his company's based in Arizona. So they saw it occurring there in 2017, 2018. So he's telling me, yeah, you should look at this. So that's when we started like, hey, let's build homes because we don't have experience, building a single family home. So we started that up with the idea of building out rentals for income. And we've done also a lot of for sale housing with that company. So that company is much easier to explain. We build single family homes. We have a townhome project that we just got approved that we may build, or we may work with another builder on that one because it's a larger number. We're building. We're probably on pace to do 60 homes a year at Great Leaf right now, and then we try to get to like 90 the year after that, and grow, and then eventually take on one of the Brightleaf subdivisions if we're like 120, 150 homes, do something like that. But that's much easier. It's a home building company, and we're rolling some of the land development into that eventually. So it'll be a small private home builder that hopefully we can grow to. If you get 5 or 6 years from now, hopefully we'll have like 4 or 5 active subdivision communities building 200 homes a year, 300, and just growing that pipeline and building that into a kind of regional, Central Florida regional home builder. So,
Yeah, no, that's cool. Do you so since you're doing both the development as well as the home building, for you personally, then what does your day to day look like between the two different businesses?
uh, it's interesting because development is such a long, process of going through, and I used to tell people, I mentioned before I started as a residential agent doing residential sales, and that's kind of like being a policeman. There's always something going on, as opposed to being a fireman. And I have my brother and two of my cousins were firemen. They're just hanging around the station waiting for something to catch on fire, and then they run in the trucks and go put out the fire. And then they go back and wait. So a lot of times with development, you set the project in motion, and then you're waiting for information to come back and then do the next step, and you're coming to critical instances where the home building is a lot more like something. We had an issue with some of our lots where the underground plumbing was put in too deep, and so it doesn't work for the drainage. It should be a gravity flow where it just gravity is pulling the water down. And I don't know what the setting was on the trench digger the our plumbing contractor is using, but he put the lines. And here in Florida, we put the plumbing lines, supply lines, and waste lines under the concrete slab. So I think you're in Iowa.
Yep.
I'm sure they do other stuff. So literally, he digs down in the ground, puts those in. They're inspected, they're sealed, covered with dirt, and then we put a big concrete slab over them. And so as we're moving forward, we realized like these are too low in the ground; they're not going to drain. And it happened at 13 different houses. So now we're
Mm,
going back. We have to put our own little pump right there, which would be a lift station if you were in a subdivision. So you might have that in a subdivision where all the homes are draining, and then you have to have a lift station to force main to get it out. So we're going to have little lift stations on all these
yeah,
houses.
all over the place.
Luckily, our plumbing
Yeah.
contractor is paying for it, but it's still a delay. And so that's kind of like these little things that come up with home building. But it's interesting. It's we're our focus is on doing middle market homes that are just nicer than what the production builders do. And I have nothing against production builders. That's who I mainly work with is the Lars and DR Hortons and Syntexis. But we're not going to have the same marketing budget as them. So we try to build slightly nicer houses, with quartz countertops, stainless steel appliances, higher ceilings, higher doors, taller windows, so that kind of stuff that the home looks more impressive. And they also have like a much more personal touch as right now as far as resolving issues. So we're really focused on the home delivery part. We have an employee whose sole purpose is like the home buyer experience to make sure they're happy, they're satisfied, they have everything they need, and it's a construction process. So you're always going to have some errors, and we just want to get those corrected as quickly as possible and resolved. And the big home builders have the same thing. It's just more corporate, more
Yep.
kind of monolithic, so it's exciting. And it's different because we're in touch with end users, where when you're selling finished lots or projects to home builders, I'm just dealing with the land acquisition manager at Lennar, you know.
Right,
And
right.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's kind
you
of
know,
funny too because when you have developers, you have some developers who will sell lots to, to end consumers as well, like on occasion, but
Mhm.
you see
Mhm.
a lot of developers, they don't necessarily want to sell to the end consumer because the end consumer a lot of times doesn't understand what's going to be able to go on that lot. And so they
Yeah.
prefer, which is maybe your case, you prefer to, sell it directly to a builder, whether that's your own building company or another builder
Mhm.
versus an end consumer that's going to then go and try to pick a builder to build on that particular lot.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and we do more of the kind of production oriented. So even though we're trying to do nicer homes, they're not custom homes.
Yeah.
They're they're nicer production homes.
Yeah.
It's but it's a different business because home buyer is going to be much more emotional than the director of land development
Right.
at
For
KB
sure.
Homes. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. On I think at the beginning you said that you got your start in advertising and marketing. Is that right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how does that play into things? Because obviously, especially on the home building side, there's an importance of marketing and advertising to try to get the homes, sold and everything. Do you lean on that quite a bit? Are there things that you learned there, or is this something where it's been a while, so you more so find the expert in that space and kind of lean more on them?
Yeah, that's surprising you asked that because we are having to like do more of that and develop that as we get to higher volume. And so we started, we have a marketing person we also brought on before it was just us. Like, let's sell these houses,
Yeah.
But then we're like, we do need a more comprehensive marketing plan. And so it was surprising because I did kind of recall a lot more of that stuff than I thought I would recall. Um, Not enough to, make good judgments in there, but it was familiar to me. So at least I wasn't starting from scratch. And it's kind of coincidence, but we're actually, have our internal marketing person and then we're hiring an external marketing consultant who is one of the guys I worked with in, 1993 or 94 at the original
Oh,
agency. So
nice,
he stayed
nice.
in the business, very successful advertising marketing still here locally. And I've used him in the past for other limited engagements. I call him like, hey, we have like a home building company, consumer facing. We really need, real marketing, advertising stuff. So that's it's kind of neat to connect. We've been friends the whole time, but it's neat to connect with him professionally and see how much he's progressed. And from when we were kids out of college to
Yeah,
now,
yeah. I've
decades
always
in.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and I've always thought that if you have, having some of that understanding of a particular, pillar or a particular area of your business, even if you're not gonna do it, like, you're gonna hire it out,
Hmm.
but having that a little bit of understanding of it, I think allows you to better hold your partners accountable and be able
Hmm.
to kinda understand if somebody's, telling you something that, that doesn't seem right, or at least being able to dig in, play devil's advocate on certain things and stuff like that
Hmm.
as well. So, um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting.
It's the same side on the sales part of it. I think if I had just maybe if I'd gone to college and had like an engineering degree or something like that and gone right into, work for US Home in Texas and land development, and you don't have that frontline sales experience of dealing with mortgage brokers and home buyers and things like that. And my partner role also has the same experience. So when we have agents selling the homes, but we kind of understand, what they're going through. We have an issue the buyer, has to do, so we've been there and seen that part. So we kind of understand what's going on, the challenges. Um, we've got a buyer on a home that was supposed to close 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they got some odd, local bank lender out of state who's doing their loan, and they're just not able to process it, and they keep on having to do extensions, and
Mm,
from our point, we like understand that's not the buyer doing that. That's their lender. So we're
yeah,
like, you might want to switch to different lender down
yeah,
here. But it's helpful, like you say, to have those other experiences you can kind of bring in and have a little bit of understanding or sympathy, depending on the situation for
right,
what other people are going through, rather than just like, why aren't you selling my homes? What's the problem
yeah,
with this buyer? What's the problem with their lender? We understand that kind of underwriting process that a home buyer has to go through and their decision making process of like, do I want to buy this home or the other home? So that's, I think, helpful. And it's something we can apply directly at like this size. I'm sure as we get larger, we'll have less contact with that. But then the people who are working in that are also have that sales experience. But I think that's probably the biggest difference between Brightleaf doing land development, where it's much more, kind of corporate company level, and Great Leaf, which is, I mean, we're dealing with home buyers, so it's, you know
Yep. Yep.
families who want a place to live and it's their home, so totally different.
Yep. Yep. Well, let's shift gears here a little bit just to talk about a project that you've had over, I mean, just throughout your career. So it doesn't even have to be one of your existing projects, but a project that you think back on that, has been, a really challenging project, or one that you've really enjoyed because it was a springboard to something. But is there one that kind of sticks
Mhm.
out in your mind that you can talk about?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and I hate to admit it, but the ones that always stick in my mind are the ones that were had problems with, and
Yeah,
that's why I'm saying,
yeah,
like,
that's how it goes.
pick pick good ones, because not only will you make more money, it'll be like, much less emotional toll, mental toll, and, so it's kinda like good project that sails through, you're like, "Oh, forget that one," and then the bad one's like, "Ah!" And I'm gonna tell this story because it comes back to project selection, where there's a really complicated infill redevelopment project here, locally. It's like 4 minutes drive from my office, and I was asked to work on it literally the first time like 20 years ago by a seasoned developer, and he's like, I need someone to help me, and someone recommended, go see Mr. Clayton, he wants someone to help kind of spearhead this project, and he's passed away, but he's a legendary developer. So I go down there, and he's going over the project and telling me, and it's complicated. There's like a land trust and deed restrictions, and it's owned by a government municipality. And he's telling me all this stuff, and I'm like, "Whoa, sounds way too complicated, too hard." All this stuff. I'm like, "I don't want to do it. I really appreciate you taking the time, but I don't want to do it." And you know, didn't do it. And then 20 years later, I had a couple of friends are like, "Hey, this project's coming back," and I've seen like four other developers like die, you know,
Yeah.
not be able to get it because everyone's like, "This time it's going to be different." And they're like, this time it's going to be different, and I bought into it, and put a lot of time and effort into it, and it was exactly the same. We this huge community opposition to it getting developed. The developers are easy to portray as the villains in the story, so we're just getting hammered by the press and the newspaper, TV. They would talk to us, but it was always like a little snippet,
Oh yeah.
and we tried to get involved in the community, but it just literally the same process repeating itself over and over, as it has for like 30 years on that project. Maybe for the six or seven developers. So that was a mistake of thinking it was going to be different, and not doing the project selection that I said is key. So that was um, probably year and a half, maybe 460,000 in due diligence, and cost, because it's a complicated mixed use redevelopment. So a lot of pre money spent before we even get out of the inspection period, and contract extensions, and like I said, just a lot of mental and emotional energy to
Yeah.
try to get it done, and then in the end, just it's not going to work. And we kind of starting to get those signals halfway through or three quarters of the way through, but part of being a developer is still banging your head against the wall until it's absolutely like the last gasp of it.
Yeah.
And that's maybe that's a skill I need to develop too, is like cutting even earlier. So,
Yeah. Well,
but
I was
yeah,
gonna
there's
ask,
there's always that.
do you in that situation, do you think that, emotions play into that site selection? You've been asked so many times over the years to take it on and stuff. Was it like an
Yeah, there was definitely
emotion?
some of that, of like,
Yeah.
hey, it's been 20 years. I know a lot more now than I know then,
Yeah.
and I've actually had two. I knew two of the guys who tried to do it. Oh, I've see what mistakes they made, and we're going to do it differently.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff, and like maybe now is really the time to redevelop it, and it should be redeveloped is really a key thing. And it's not that people think the site should be redeveloped. It's just it has historical significance, so everyone is really sensitive about how it's developed,
Okay.
and that's challenging because everyone has ideas. And we had several community meetings, that my partner led one, I led one. I was, like I said, put a lot of time and effort into it to try to communicate that we are, trying to deliver something realistic. And people get up and opposition say it shouldn't be this, it should be this, and I'm like, that's in the plan, like,
Yeah.
it just it's hard because development is a complicated thing, and you're dealing with just members of the community who are understandably concerned and passionate about what's going to come into their community, no matter where we are. And this one was just especially significant, and it's easier to say no and keep things the way they are than to say yes to change. And I tell people that's not necessarily anything with this project or this community. They're all like that. Most people show up say don't let them, you know, don't let them turn the orange grove into houses or the cow pasture into a Walmart. They just keep it the way.
Yeah.
And then their friends and neighbors move into the houses and they go shop at the Walmart and they get gas at the convenience store, and they forget about it. But at the time, it's just easier to say, no, I don't want to do that. And, I told someone one time, I'm like, pretty sure Bill Gates could come to me like, Sean, I'm going to give you $10 million to build a children's hospital. It's going to be free.
Yeah.
I'm going to fund the whole thing. And I would go with that project and someone would show up and like, this is a bad idea. Don't do
Yep.
it.
Yep.
you know, I'm like, what about the kids? Yeah, I don't care. So that's just, I think that's just a broad, percentage of the population is like, just don't change things because it's unknown and that worries me. I know what I have now. Let's keep everything the
Yeah.
same. And I would say a fundamental problem with the land development process, as it's done in most jurisdictions, is the public hearing process. And I don't know how it is in Iowa, but we're required to, we'll contact the surrounding property owners and we'll advertise in the paper, we'll put signs. And the only people that typically show up are surrounding property owners. So if we're in a city commission meeting last night and we want to build 135 new homes and annex into the city and it got approved. But, as I'm thinking, no one who wants to buy the house or wants to live there shows up and says, this is what I want.
Hmm.
This one of the common thing is, these homes should be bigger or the lots should be bigger or there should be fewer of them. And everyone who's saying that already has a house.
Right.
you know, no one's speaking for like people who are like, I need a place to live and we don't have enough homes and the rent is really high and the home price is really high. And so that's a kind of a fundamental to me problem is that only people who already own homes show up and their
Yeah.
attitude always seems to be no more, you know, no
Right.
more homes. I have a house. I'm fine. I don't know why we need these other ones.
Yeah. That's what we
So
would
I don't know.
I was gonna say that's what we would see on, on social media when you'd get people chiming in, kind of it's a lot of times, the faceless people, they'll just, chime in, give their opinion online and, say things like, we don't need to develop that. Why are we developing like here, out west? Why do you keep
Hmm.
developing out west, further west, further? You're taking the
Hmm.
farmland and everything. And, it's the question back to them is like, well, where where are all the new people going to live? Like,
Hmm.
where do you want them to live? Like,
Yeah.
because there's never solutions provided when, I'm okay with if somebody wants to chime in and provide their opinion and oppose something, it's like, that's all good. But usually when you want to bring something up as a problem, you should come up with
Hmm.
a solution that could, be executed on versus what, is being proposed as the solution with the
Hmm.
new development and everything. So yeah, we see that a lot. I'm guessing everywhere everybody sees that with
Yeah, that's
people.
what that's what I think. And Central Florida, Orlando, we were always affordable. So and they'll even call it the game of me. I find 100-acre site, or you find 100-acre site, and we talk to our consultants, and they're like, "Hey, I think we can build 200 homes on here." And then we go into the development manager. Here's my project, and here's where it's located, and here's where and they're like, okay. And then you go to the city commission and the homeowners show up and like, not so many houses, not so many houses. They're like, can you do 190 or can you do 185? And then we'll play the game and we'll just take some units and throw them away. They're fit on there. They would, be 10 new houses. It actually makes everything less expensive because you're still doing an entrance, you're still doing, you know, community
Yeah.
amenities, all that stuff. And you just repeat that game over and over, project and project and project, city, jurisdiction, states, and then you end up with a shortage of housing because you're taking the land that could be developed and you're just kind of, you know, I'm not going to develop it. And it doesn't make for less houses. It just makes you have to push on to the next 40 acres or, 20 acres. So you
Right.
actually
Right.
end up sprawling out faster. But, people don't have that kind of, and I understand it. I mean, they don't have that kind of systems thinking. We'll we do each project, you're either in the county or you're in a city. But if we get, if we build 135 houses in, Mount Dora, Florida, it helps the people in the neighboring community too, because there's more housing in the area. So if we build, we got a build to rent project approved in uh, Lake County, and someone was saying, well, how do those rents compare to Orlando? I'm like, they're less, but we add more housing here, and you kind of have a little leapfrog effect, and it could, indirectly lower someone's rent in Orlando. It's
Right.
people, 50 miles away, because it's a whole system, and people do drive 30, 40 minutes or miles for housing, and they'll switch for things. So, um, I'm on one side of town, and my friend Kyle's on the other side of town, but together adding housing solution, adding more housing, and that's unfortunately the only solution to that. I think is just more supply of homes that
Yeah.
make it affordable. And it's we didn't talk about the property management side, but we have that division that does property management, and I've never been actively involved in that, but you hear as we had rapid rent increases, people are like, I don't know, I'm going to pay this increase, and I know they try to work with them, but as the market gets tighter, housing inventory, rents go up, and it's a struggle to do that. And that's something I think that in the beginning, I was just trying to get projects approved. Like, here's my job, I need to like create housing, to do the job. And then as I saw that kind of both on home buyers and renters, I'm like, we need to. It's like serious. Like, we need more housing of all
Yeah.
types. And it's because I don't think communities function as well if someone's like, I'm paying, it used to be affordable here, so you're paying 24% or 27% of your income towards housing, and then it hops up to like 35, you know, something like that, where the rent increase and the home prices are higher than wage growth, and it gets uncomfortable, and then you have just unhappy people in your
Yeah.
community that are struggling and trying to, so yeah, I don't know if that's hard to express at a city commission meeting, but it's kind of like a mindset shift that has to occur, and I think it has occurred. I have an associate that worked with me many years ago, and he's moved to North Carolina, and then he started doing projects in California. And he told me, like, in California, they finally figured it out. It just took decades, but finally, those non-property owners, who don't get mailed, they figured out, like, we need more housing. He said so. And he was doing the thing with me in Florida where people show up like, no, not as many houses. And
Yeah.
he's like, the last 2 or 3 years, the people in California figured out we actually need more housing. So they'll come in and like add more density, do more units, do that stuff. So he's like, they did finally, like, after you get enough pain, financial pain
Eventually,
and
eventually
stress.
they come
Yeah,
around.
the people are like, what's going on? And I kind of feel like saying that, when we have the homeowners, the thing is like, do you have kids? Do you have grandkids? Are they in high school or college? Where do you think they're going to live? What are they going to buy? What are they going to rent when they graduate? Because it's not
Yep.
going to be, you know, it's not going to be one of these houses. Yeah, that's going to take a long time to unwind, I think. So,
Yeah, I think so too. And I think so we're at just over 30 minutes here and want to move into the last segment of the show, which is a lightning round. And some of this stuff you already touched on. So you may have a little bit of repeat here on a couple of these
okay.
things, but essentially what I'll do is I have 5 questions, and then the idea is for you to answer the questions in roughly 60 seconds or so. So just kind of
Okay.
a quick answer on what you think for each of these. So the first one I feel like you were just talking about a little bit ago, but you might have a different answer for it. So the first question is, what's the biggest challenge facing developers and builders in the Orlando area right now?
I think it's opposition to growth in there, and it's just a struggle to get that. And then you struggle with infrastructure because you have to have utility and roadway capacity and school capacity and things like that. So it's hard to manage rapid growth, I think, in any kind of business, and especially in real estate development,
Yeah.
because you're looking 2 or 3 years ahead.
Okay. Second question. What's one piece of advice you'd give to your younger self?
I would say spend more time networking to get to know other people in the industry and what they're doing, because and it could have been the nature of how education was there, but I felt like I had to figure out a lot of stuff on my own or just asking people directly. And I think if I had taken a more kind of formal approach to like let me go through the real estate development textbook, like
Yeah.
at Urban Land Institute. Probably could have saved some shortcuts. And then the other advice I would just give it is back to project selection. It's like just focus and specialize and get good at one thing, whether it's one type of housing or one geography or something like that. Assuming it's a good product type and good geography is
Yeah.
kind of specialized if you can and pick your horses. Don't go out there
Yeah.
for the super
Yeah.
challenging deal.
No, I like it. All right, next one. Since you've co-founded at least one company that I can tell of as you being a co-founder of it, how would you suggest finding the right business partner?
I think that real estate development kind of lends itself to trial, because you're doing project by project. And so I would just test out, get to know, kind of going back to like networking if you go to ULI events or just, I'm sure it's like a lot of places, there's not that many real estate developers who are going to be in your area and just meet them and get to know them and do some trial runs with them. And I give that example of the project that was really challenging. And typically, I'm doing it with just me or one other guy. And that one we had four. We actually came in to kind of split the risk. We started with five, and one of them dropped out,
Mhm.
halfway through. But it was interesting because you encounter the problems, and sometimes I would have an idea, and the other guy would be like, "Oh, I never would have taken that approach," and the exact opposite happened the other way where it's like this thing happened. I'm like, here's what I'm going to do. And the guy's like, no, let's do this way. I'm like, that's a better. And so even though the project failed, like we lost money, we didn't get it approved, we didn't get it over the line. The experience of working with a larger team was positive because we kind of like at the end looked at each other, we're like, well, we got our asses kicked, but it was interesting to see, the other guy's approach and figure out that we're actually smarter as a team of four than we probably would have been as like one or two. So
Yeah.
um, it kind of has to do with the size of the project. It's not feasible on a lot of them. Don't need four developers,
Yep.
for like a typical residential. But that was interesting. But I would say just try to do trial runs and check people out.
Okay. So with you having multiple companies that you're a part of, how do you hold yourself accountable to make sure you're getting things done that need to get done?
I'm terrible at that. So that's I think I've kind of been like a entrepreneur, that stuff. And that's the hardest part is when you're young, it's real easy because you have like a boss and he's like, come here this time, do this, and you just that's what I'm going to do because that's what he said to do. That go march up that hill, and then when you're on your own or the entrepreneur, you're like, there's lots of different things I could do. Which one do I need to do today? Which one? How should I do it? So that's the part of like deciding what to do and prioritizing, and it's more challenging now that we have the home building side because you have those different time horizons and different pace and different levels of focus that come into it. So it's kind of that switching back between, what's going on in 3 to 5 years, what's going on in this one year, what's going on this month, what's happening this week, what I need to do this afternoon.
Yeah.
So that's challenging. I would say having partners helps. I have figured out like if I have partners, helps me focus. I've had instances where I've had project with just me working on the project myself, and I'm 100% invested in it, and I have one where I'm 20%, and I'll spend more time on the 20% because I have other partners, and I'm like I can let myself off the hook, and so my project that I have more invested in gets less attention if
Yeah.
I have projects to do it with partners. So, but it's putting that organization in place where you have other colleagues who are keeping each other,
Yep. Okay.
on task in there.
Cool. All right. Last one. What skills do you think are most important for someone to be successful in real estate development?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'd say you have to be comfortable, kind of managing and directing all of your vendors and consultants. You have to be comfortable with, risk taking and kind of making those decisions under uncertainty. You have to be, I think, really interested in real estate development too. Like you have to, like I enjoy the process. So, maybe try it, maybe find, if you're thinking about it, maybe find a guy who's an active developer and ask if you can assist somehow to kind of get a taste for what it's like. Because some people just, they hate it. you know,
Yeah.
uh, I have I had a guy he's a successful builder, and about two years ago, he's like, "Hey, I think I'm going to start developing a couple of small projects." I'm like, "All right." And he's like, "Can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he realized he does not like it. So he told me like 2 years later, he's like, "You want to take over these projects?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "I'm going back to building." He's like, "This development, it's I do not like
Yeah,
it at all." He's like,
that's
like I
funny.
understand what you're saying. Yeah. So yeah, so I would say find a way to test it out, and if you don't like it, go do something else you like. It's much easier.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, with that said, probably a good spot to wrap up. And what's the best way for people listening in right now to learn more about you or connect with you or learn more about your companies?
Yeah, I would say connect with me on LinkedIn, on that LinkedIn profile. Sean Myers with Brightleaf Properties or Greatleaf Homes in Orlando, Florida, and that's a good way to connect. I have relationships with people on there I haven't met in person. you know, so that's good way to do it. We have website greatleafhomes.com, something they can go to check out what we're going on with the private home building company that we're growing here.
Okay. Cool. Well, as always, the that information will be in the show notes page, so those you listening in can click in the description, get to the show notes page, and get that information to connect with Sean. And with that said, that is all for this episode. If you haven't already clicked that subscribe button, we really appreciate you doing so. And we will talk to you next week. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ryan. Thank you.